Good evening, everybody. Jnana Ruchi here, back on the video for our Wednesday night Sangha nights on YouTube. Sorry I wasn't here 3 weeks ago. I was laid up with the labyrinthitis. I was very dizzy and found it very unpleasant to kind of move around. Although not 100%, I'm doing much better. Thank you for asking. So here we are, the St Edmunds Buddhist Centre online, or whatever we're called these days, never quite know. And this is going to be the last of our stories from the Buddhist tradition. From next week, Trudakaran will be starting us on a theme of why I am a Buddhist, or why I am an ordained Buddhist, or why I am still an ordained Buddhist. So a wide selection of views possible there from myself, Trudakaran and Abhayavaja over the next 3 weeks. So come back, discover why we're Buddhists. Who knows what will come of that. Okay, but back to tonight. So for the last of our stories from the Buddhist tradition, I'm going to tell the story of Bahir of the bark garment, or Bahir of the bark cloth. So this is from the Udana collection of, well, it's a very early strata of the Buddhist canon, of the Pali canon. So they're quite short, pithy stories, teachings. There's not much of the repetition and formulaic structure that you get in some of the sort of longer and later stories. So this is quite a short story, and it's quite personal and has a very pithy teaching attached to it, which we'll be exploring in the accompanying video meditation, which will be a video. So yeah. Okay, so I'll get started. So there's a man called Bahir of the bark cloth. He's been a spiritual practitioner for many years, probably most of his life, and he feels he's doing very well. He lives on his own. He lives on charity, on the generosity of people giving alms for him to eat. He wears bark for clothes, hence his name, Bahir of the bark cloth, or Bahir of the bark garment. So he just dresses in old bits of tree and bark that he's found. So he's a man of little want. He's obviously content, and as you'll see, I think he has got quite a substantial amount of spiritual practice under his belt. However, well, he thinks this himself, in fact. And at one point, he's sitting there meditating in India somewhere. And he thinks, gosh, I must be close to enlightenment. I'm definitely on the path to enlightenment. And out of nowhere, a deva comes to him. So a god, an Indian folk god, and says, Bahir, you are not close to enlightenment. You're not even on the right path to enlightenment. Bahir is shocked. He recognizes this deva as one of a reborn relative of his. So there's a bit of a connection there. And he seems to take this deva, this god, at its word, and he says, okay. He says, well, what should I do? Is there anyone who is enlightened, who is a deep spiritual practitioner that may be able to teach me? And the deva says, yes, there is. At Savatthi in the Jeta's Grove, many miles from here, there is the Buddha, the fully enlightened one. He is awakened to reality and could teach you. So Bahir decides to get out of there, go and meet the Buddha. So it's said he crosses 1,200 miles in just one night. So we imagine from that he's probably There's other hints in the commentary to suggest he's in Western India, possibly near the sea. So the Buddha is in north and east India, so the Jeta's Grove is in Savatthi. So a very long way indeed, and Bahia crosses it in just a night. And he gets to the Jeta's Grove. He finds all the Buddha's monks doing walking meditation in the early part of the day. He says, well, which one of you is the Buddha? And one of the monks says, oh, no, the Buddha is not here. He is gathering alms in the local town in Savatthi. So Bahia rushes off. He's desperate to find enlightenment, so he rushes off to Savatthi. As he goes into the town, he sees some monks begging, and he immediately recognizes the Buddha. In fact, he says, and I quote, he was serene and inspiring confidence, calming. His senses are at peace. His mind is at peace, having attained the utmost tranquility and poise, tamed, guarded, his senses restrained, a great one. So Bahia realizes the Buddha is the Buddha, and he goes up to him and asks for a teaching. And the Buddha says, Bahia, it is not the right time. I'm on my arms round. And again, Bahia asks for a teaching, and again the Buddha declines. Bahia asks for a third time, and traditionally, if the Buddha is asked something 3 times, he cannot deny it. So the Buddha stops his arm round, and he says to Bahia, then Bahia, you should train yourself thus. In reference to the seen, there will be only the seen. In reference to the heard, only the heard. In reference to the sensed, only the sensed. In reference to the cognized, only the cognized. That is how you should train yourself. When for you, there will be only the seen in reference to the seen, and only the heard in reference to the heard, only the sensed in reference to the sensed, only the cognized in reference to the cognized. Then, Bahia, there is no you in connection with that. When there is no you in connection with that, then there is no you there. When there is no you there, you are neither here nor yonder, nor between the two. This, just this, is the end of suffering. Quite a pithy teaching from the Buddha there. We'll come back to that. But upon hearing that, Bahia immediately realized what the Buddha was talking about. He ceased clinging and was basically enlightened. The Buddha left. He left Bahia to continue on his alms round. Bahia was obviously clearly kind of awestruck with the Buddha's message, and Bahia went off. It's said soon afterwards, Bahia was killed by a cow with a young calf. When the Buddha heard this later in the day, when he was sitting with his monks, the monks said, well, what should we do, Buddha? And the Buddha said, well, the monks asked for what was the future state of Bahia. And the Buddha said that Bahia was wise and totally unbound, and that they should build him a memorial, a stupa, and commemorate him as one of the arhants. And then it is said, and this is the Udana, so it is said, on this occasion, the Buddha recognizing the importance of this, the Buddha says, where water, earth, fire and wind have no footing, there the stars don't shine, the sun isn't visible, there the moon doesn't appear, there darkness is not found. And when a sage, a Brahmin through sagacity, has realized this for himself, then from form and formless, from bliss and pain, he is freed. And that's the end of the story. Okay, I'm just going to check the video because the old screen things come on. Yeah, I think we're still going. Don't panic. Okay, so maybe I'll just read that Udana from the Buddha again. So an udana is an inspired utterance. So this is the Buddha's inspired utterance on hearing that Bahir, who has recently gained enlightenment, has died. Where water, earth, fire and wind have no footing, there the stars don't shine, the sun isn't visible. There the moon doesn't appear. There darkness is not found. And when a sage, a Brahmin through sagacity, has realized this for himself, then from form and formlessness, from bliss and pain, he is freed. Okay, so what's all this about? What's this story about? Well, clearly there's an explicit teaching in there. The explicit teaching is, in the seen only the seen, in the heard only in the heard, in the sensed only the sensed. And this is really getting at a teaching of how to drop out of stories, how to drop out of papancha, how to drop out of views even, and just have an awareness or a bare attention on whatever is going on in the moment without any fabrication or mental constructions. And this is a very important teaching. We would practice it in True Atma terms as the practice of just sitting, which I'll be doing in the accompanying, I'll be leading us through in the accompanying meditation video. But there's much more to this story than just that, because that clearly isn't enough. So, I could sit here now, just being aware of the pressure of my feet on the floor, the sounds coming from the room, my body relaxing. And I'm not, I hate to admit to you, fully enlightened just yet. So there's more to this whole story than just the teaching, or the explicit teaching. I think the theme of this story is one of trust and receptivity. So what do we have? I can sort my notes. So we've got Bahir. He's clearly a strong spiritual practitioner. If he's happy living wearing parts of a tree for his clothes, and he's been doing that for some time, he's developed a certain level of contentment, which most of us would find tricky, I imagine. So he's got somewhere, but he's not quite on the right path yet. And so the first thing that happens to Bahir is, you could say, he has a sense of doubt about what he's doing. And that's definitely true. But the other side of that is there's an intuitive realization he is on the wrong track. And that's interesting in itself, how doubt and intuitive wisdom are related. Doubt is not always bad or even unskillful. It can lead to a greater criticism and inventiveness and imagination even. So Bahir is concerned he's not on the right track, and it seems that he's right in that. So his intuition is correct, and his intuition points him towards the Buddha. So we don't need to get too caught up in how the local god or deva or spirit or whatever knows where the Buddha is. We just sort of know that the Buddha trusts what this deva, what this intuitive sense is telling him, and he goes to find the Buddha. He goes where the Buddha's staying. The Buddha's not there. The monks tell him to go to town where the Buddha is, and then he goes to town, and there would have been several monks, wanderers, collecting alms at this point. But Bahir notices immediately who the Buddha is. He says, this man was serene, inspiring confidence, calming. His senses were at peace, his mind at peace, having attained the utmost tranquility, and poise. He was tamed, guarded, his senses restrained. He was a great one. So this is again where Bahir is being completely receptive. He's seeing the Buddha for who he truly is. This wasn't the case for everyone. The Buddha didn't walk around glowing golden having an aura, although he is depicted like that sometimes. In fact, after the Enlightenment, the first person that the Buddha met didn't really realize he was, the person he met didn't realize that he was talking to an enlightened being. He asked him a series of questions, wasn't very impressed, and carried on his way. And that was just after the Enlightenment, so the Buddha was sort of glowing of newfound depth and inspiration. So the Bahir is ready to see the Buddha, and he clearly sees him, and that's important. So he goes up to the Buddha. They get into this funny thing about, it's not the right time for the teaching. Oh, I can hear rain. Gosh, quite a lot of rain. Hope it won't interfere with my sound. Hello, hello. So Bahir is desperate for the teaching. That's what we get from this. So Bahir asks the Buddha 3 times, and the Buddha refuses 2 times. And on the 3rd time, he says, okay, Bahir. And he gives him this teaching. In the seen, only the seen. In the heard, only the heard. In the sensed, only the sensed. Now, Bahir doesn't have to go and meditate on this. He recognizes the depth and the profundity of what the Buddha is saying immediately. So it is said he's released from clinging the moment he hears this. And that is, that's sort of astounding, I suppose, because most of us tend to have to undergo years of spiritual practice before we start having deep and profound experiences. Well, no, that's not true, actually. We can have a variety of experiences on the path. I think they do get deeper as you go along. But there does seem to be a sort of progression. Now, I have said that Bahir did have a long history of spiritual practice, but it seems that there's a sort of quantum leap, if you will, from where he was before he spoke to the Buddha and hearing this teaching. And I would say that's because he is so open and receptive to what the Buddha says and trusts it completely. And I think this is really important. This is possibly the primary teaching of this sutta. And this is something that I think all Buddhist traditions have something to say on. So in the Zen tradition, there's a very strong emphasis on the student-master relationship. And in the Tibetan tradition, again, there's another very strong emphasis on, well, there they phrase it differently, so it's always slightly different in these things, but they will talk about initiations and empowerments that the guru gives to the student. And that will be sort of wrapped up in a particular ritual and particular meditation methods. But what's really getting at there is that there's a openness and trust on the sense of the student and a willingness to give and compassionate urge in the sense of the master or the guru. And we have that, well, we have a similar theme or similar tradition or similar type of relationship in Triratna. And this happens between the preceptor and the preceptee. So I think this is where, in my own experience, I can sort of empathise with this, not obviously to the extent of Bahir, but I can see how my spiritual life really, there was a gear change when I found or asked the man to be my preceptor, and he said yes, and we sort of formed a relationship of Kalyana Mitrata there. So a spiritual friendship based on my trust in him, that he was more significantly along the path, and his willingness to share his wisdom, experience and kindness with me. So that was Ratnagosha, who was the ex-chair of the Cambridge Centre, who comes to give the occasional talk at the various Edmunds. And I think this really does, it opens you, when you find someone you can trust like this, or in a Sangha as well. I think that this can work for a Sangha, so you need to find a Sangha and a body of teachings that you trust. Trust is very important in the spiritual life. If you don't trust in what you're doing and that the path of that teaching, then you're not really going to be able to progress. I think that's reasonably obvious, isn't it? If you don't really trust in it, well, you're not going to put much effort into it, I think, or you're not going to put as much effort as you could do. And that effort you do put in probably wouldn't be that wholehearted. So you need to have trust in what you're doing and in that tradition, and as you progress in that person, because then those teachings become more personal. So this is shown by the Buddha and Ba here. So it's a one-to-one communication. When we get started on the spiritual life, we just need the basics, really. We need to learn to meditate, do the mindfulness of breathing, the metta bhavana. We need to learn about ethics and how that's related to the intention and the mental state of the action we're doing. And that will get us quite a long way. And then as we get further along, we need to have more particular teachings to us. So that might be we need to put more effort into our meditation, or we need to relax in our meditation. We need to get stronger in our ethics, or we might need to take our ethics less literally and have more of a heartfelt sense in relation to them. And these things can only come out of more of a student-disciple relationship, or in our tradition you'd call it a preceptor-preceptee relationship. And this is wrapped up in ordination, which is where you start to make a definite commitment to the spiritual life in the true Ratna tradition, well, for the rest of your life, really. Yep. So that's what's going on here. So Ba here has complete trust in the Buddha. He sees him as his Kalyana Mitra, his spiritual friend, his guru, his teacher. And whatever the Buddha says, Ba here was open to it and would have taken it so seriously, his whole being would have listened to this teaching. And this is what happened. And on this occasion, it went deep enough so that Ba here was completely released from clinging and became, as it is said in the text, totally unbound. Yeah, just going to check the screen's gone black again, so I'm just going to check where we are. There we are, 23 minutes. Promising myself I wouldn't ramble on too long. Yeah, and then more, what could you say, prosaically, what does the teaching do? So the teaching itself, as I said, it's a practice of just sitting. And what we do, we just pay attention to whatever arises in our awareness at any moment. And what that's really doing there is it's teaching us to let go of our intention, to let go of our ego striving, and to relax. Now, this doesn't mean we become passive, because when you practice this, you'll realise you have to put quite a lot of energy into being receptive, because it's very easy to get caught up in something mentally and get taken away by it in a little story or something. So it takes a lot of energy, but it's a receptive mode of experiencing. And then what does Ba here say? What does the Buddha say? He says, when for you there will be only the seen in reference to the seen, only the heard in reference to the seen, there is no you in connection with that. When there is no you in connection with that, there is no you there. When there is no you there, you are neither here nor yonder, nor between the two. This, just this, is the end of suffering. Oh, a bit of a funny old thing to say, isn't it? And what that's getting at is that what this practice is teaching us to do by letting go of our intention or intention to identify with something, let go of our ego striving, Freudian slip. Our clinging ceases then. So we tend to be creatures of habit and clinging. We move towards what we like and move away from what we don't like, which is kind of fine in itself. But we often identify with those movements to or away from things. And that is what causes us suffering. So that mere movement towards and movement away is where we get in a tangle. Because if we're constantly doing that, can you see we're constantly sort of in the move, sort of going between this and that. And when we can just sort of let this and that arise on its own without interfering with that process, then we can start to be more still. When we become more still, those thises and that's, those cravings and aversions die away even more. The habits that feed those movements, cravings and aversions, starts to drop away. And we become more and more still. As we become more and more still, that whole complex of habitual action that we are start to soften, cool, and disappear. So the sense of a permanent, substantial individual starts to drop away. And we realise all there really is a constant play of unfolding conditions. But there's no identification in that. There's no clinging to what's going on. And from that, freedom, happiness, complete letting go arises, which is deeply fulfilling. And out of that, well, suffering ceases as well. This doesn't mean that there's nothing left. It's not a nihilistic statement, because Bahir is obviously still there. He's still standing in front of the Buddha. In fact, the Buddha, who's realised this previously, is still standing there talking to Bahir. So it's not as if you disappear into, I don't know, space or the ether, or turn into a grey cloud, and you still have a sort of personality, if you will, but there's no grasping behind that personality. And this is what Bahir experienced. And then poor old Bahir goes off. He's quite pleased with himself, or not pleased with himself, or transcended, being pleased and not pleased with himself. And he gets killed with a cow, by a cow, with a young calf. So what could this mean? You could look at it mythically, if you wish. You could sort of see it as a demonstration, a poetic demonstration of the death of the ego, particularly because the cow has a young calf there, so it's a sort of spiritual rebirth. Or it could just be highlighting the urgency of the spiritual life. So, as I said before, Bahir asked the Buddha 3 times. He interrupted him 3 times for a teaching while he was desperate to know. And then indeed, only what it seems hours later, Bahir died. So there does seem to be some truth in the fact that Bahir needed to have the teaching. He was aware of death. Not that he knew he was going to die, but he was aware of the closeness of death all the time. So just the urgency of spiritual practice coming out there. Okay, well, I think that's probably said enough. Can't think if I missed anything else. No. So we've had the teaching of Bahir of the bark garment today. He thinks he's enlightened, finds the Buddha. Buddha gives him a very pithy teaching. And after that, Bahir is released from clinging and becomes totally unbound. I've talked about how that teaching only went so deep in Bahir because he was receptive and totally trusted the Buddha. I talked about how we need to have that element of openness and trust and receptivity in our own lives in regard to our spiritual path. Because without trust and openness and receptivity, we are likely to be just stuck in our own habits, preferences, ego desires. We kind of need someone else, something bigger than us, to point us in the right direction. And that's what Bahir got from the Buddha. So I'll end with the dana from the Buddha just again. Where water, earth, fire and wind have no footing, there the stars don't shine, the sun isn't visible. There the moon doesn't appear. There darkness is not found. And when a sage, a Brahman through sagacity, has realised this for himself, then from form and formlessness, from bliss and pain, he is freed. Thank you. Good night.